My children sat down at this kitchen table in March and asked me to leave this house. And I gave them an answer. 5 parts to it, worked out in advance, and it was not the answer any of us expected. Number 4 is the one that ended the argument entirely, and it isn't no. My name is Walter. I'm 82 years old, and I've lived alone in this house in Maine since I lost my wife, Helen, 7 years ago. Maybe this conversation has already happened at your table. Maybe it hasn't yet, and you can feel it coming. In the questions, in the pauses, in the way your son looks at the stairs when he visits. It's a bad feeling to carry around, and most people carry it alone. So I'll give you the whole of what I said to them in order. And stay with me through number 4, because that's the one that changed everything. And it's the part I'd most want you to have ready before somebody asks you. The first thing I said to them was, "You're not wrong to ask." I said it first, and I said it plainly, before anything else, and I'd tell anybody in this position to do the same, because they weren't wrong. There was a February morning about a month before, and David drove up from Portland unannounced, and the walk hadn't been shoveled. It had been 3 days since the snow, and what he didn't know, and what I told him standing right there, because there wasn't much point lying about it, was that I'd been doing it in stages, 15 minutes at a time. 3 days to clear a walk that took me 40 minutes when I was 70. I watched my son take that in, and I understood, watching his face, that he wasn't being controlling and he wasn't being difficult. He was frightened. My son was standing in a driveway being frightened about his father, and that is not a thing you get to be angry at somebody for. So that's where I started. Not with my position, with theirs. And I'd tell anybody facing this to do the same thing, for a reason that has nothing to do with being nice about it. If you open with your position, if the first words out of your mouth are, "I'm not going anywhere," you have just told your children that their fear is not going to be discussed. And a fear that can't be discussed does not go away. It goes underground and comes back in 6 months with a brochure. They need to hear out loud from you that you understand what they're afraid of and that you don't think they're wrong to be afraid. Everything else I said that afternoon only worked because I said that first. I didn't concede the house. I conceded the fear. Those are different things, and the whole conversation turns on the difference. If you're walking this road alone, subscribe to this channel so you don't have to walk it alone. All right, number 2. The second thing I said was, "But you're asking the wrong question." And I want to spend some time here because this is where most of these conversations go wrong, and it isn't anybody's fault. It's that the two sides of the table are running entirely different arithmetic and neither one knows it. Here's the question my children were asking. Is he safe? That's it. That's the whole of it. And it's a fair question, and it comes from love. And if you run the numbers on that question alone, the answer is obvious. Am I safer here? 82 years old, alone, 4 acres, a wood stove, stairs, ice from November to April, 20 minutes from a hospital on a good day, or safer in a building with people trained to look after me and a call button on the wall. I'm not going to pretend that's a close call. It isn't. On that question, they win, and they win easily, and any honest man my age has to say so. But safety is not the only thing a life is measured in, and it never has been for anybody at any age. If safety were the only measure, nobody would drive a car. Nobody would climb a ladder to hang a curtain. Nobody would have gotten in a boat, ever in the whole history of the world. We accept risk constantly every day of our lives in exchange for things we want, and nobody thinks that's foolish until you turn about 75, and then suddenly every risk you take is evidence that you've lost your judgment. The question that actually matters isn't, is he safe? It's what is the life, and what does it cost to keep it? And is that a trade he'd make? And that's a question only I can answer, because I'm the only one living in here. Now I want to tell you about a man named Carl Dubois, because he's the reason I feel as strongly about this as I do. Carl had a place about 4 miles from here, a small farm that hadn't been farmed since the 60s, but he kept the barn up, and he had a garden, and he kept a few things going. His wife died about a year before Helen, and his daughter, who lived down in Massachusetts and who I'm sure loved him, got him into an apartment in Bangor at about 80. Nice place. Everything handled. Meals if he wanted them, no snow to shovel, no wood stove, no stairs, a nurse who came through twice a week. And every single thing about that decision was correct on the question they were asking. He was dead in 3 years. Not of anything in particular. He just went out like a fire nobody put wood on. And I've thought a great deal about why, because I don't want to be sentimental about it, and I don't want to blame that girl, who did what she thought was right and probably was right. But here's what I believe happened, and I believe it because I've watched it more than once. They took the friction out. All of it. Every single thing in that man's day that required something from him, gone. No wood to bring in, nothing to fix. Nothing that would fail if he didn't attend to it. And it turned out the friction was what was holding the day up. Carl had spent 60 years being needed by a piece of property, and the property was demanding and inconvenient, and it woke him up in the morning. And when they removed all of that in the name of his comfort, there was nothing left in the day at all. He wasn't safe. He was stored. He wasn't safe. He was stored. I saw him twice in those 3 years. The second time he was pleasant and he was polite, and there was nothing to talk about. Nothing had happened to him. That was the trouble. He had nothing to report because his days had stopped producing anything to report, and a man with nothing to report goes quiet, and a man who's gone quiet is most of the way there. I'm not saying the apartment killed him. I'm saying the apartment was safe and empty, and that of the two, empty is the one that gets you. That's not what a nursing home is necessarily, and I'll say clearly that I've known people for whom the move was exactly right, and who did well, and who I'd have been wrong to argue with. But it's what it was for Carl, and Carl is 4 miles up this road, and he is very much on my mind whenever this comes up. Before the next one, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and how old you are. Just the town and the number. And tell me whether this conversation has happened at your table yet, because I'd guess a great many of you are somewhere in the middle of it right now, and it would do people good to see they aren't the only ones. I read every single one, and I answer as many as these old hands allow. And if this is helping you, that thumbs up tells YouTube to show it to somebody else sitting alone tonight. Number 3, the third thing I said to them was, here's what I'm actually afraid of, and it isn't what you think. They think I'm afraid of dying. I'm not. I'd rather it was later than sooner, but I'm 82 and I've had a long run, and I buried my wife 7 years ago, and death and I have come to a working arrangement. What I'm afraid of is being kept alive, comfortable, warm, fed, checked on twice a day, and not required by anything or anybody. That's the fear. And it is a much larger fear than the fear of a fall, and nobody who's 60 years old and worried about their father has any idea it exists, because from the outside it looks like exactly what you'd want for somebody you love. Let me tell them what a Tuesday actually contains here, because that's what I did at that table. I'm up at 5:15. I build the fire. That's kindling and birch bark and the smaller pieces, and then the ash rounds once it's caught, and it's the first work of the day, and I like it. Coffee at this table for 45 minutes while it gets light on the cedars. Fill the feeder. Watch it a while. Shop by 9. There's always something on that bench. Right now, a small chest of drawers for my daughter that she doesn't know about. 3-4 hours out there. Come in, cook a proper meal and eat it at the table. Afternoon, I might walk the 4 acres. Look at the wall on the north line, which loses 2 or 3 stones a year to frost, and which I put back every spring. Look at a beach that's been dying for 6 years and is finally going to have to come down. Split some wood in the fall, an hour at a stretch, which is all I do now. Call somebody, cook supper, fire, read for 2 hours. I've been on the ice sheet that came off this exact land 13,000 years ago and left the stones I've been putting back in that wall for 50 years, which is a thing I didn't know until I was 77. Write one good thing down on a yellow pad. Bank the fire. Bed. Now here's what I asked them at the table. Which of those do I do in a facility? Not to be difficult, genuinely. Go down the list. The fire is a fire hazard. The shop is power tools and an 82-year-old man alone. The wood is lifting. The walk is ice. The cooking is a stove. The wall is stooping and carrying. Every single item on that list is, from the outside, a risk to be managed. And every single item on that list is, from the inside, the actual content of a human life. That's the whole disagreement, right there, in one sentence. The things they want to remove are not the dangers in my day. They are my day. And there's a piece underneath that which I've turned over a good deal since. Thinking about Carl, his day used to make demands on him. That's the plain fact of it. The barn wanted something. The garden wanted something. In January, the pipes wanted watching, and in March, the roof wanted watching. And there was never a week in 60 years when that property didn't need Carl Dubois for something. Being needed by 4 acres is not the same as being needed by a person. I understand that, but it's a great deal closer to it than most people think. And when it stops, a man who's had it every day of his adult life notices the absence in his body long before he can put a name to it. In that apartment, nothing needed him. Not one thing. The heat came on by itself. The meals arrived. If he'd stayed in that chair for an entire day, nothing on this earth would have gone wrong as a result of it. And I think he sat in it and understood, without ever putting it into words, that the world had finished asking him for things. That he'd been moved out of the group of people the world requires something from and into the group it provides for. And that there was no route back. That's the transfer I'm actually afraid of. Not the building, the transfer. And you can make that transfer without moving an inch, which is the part worth knowing. There are men in their own houses on this road who made it years ago, who stopped being asked for anything by anyone and let the days go by. The building has very little to do with it, which cuts both ways, and I'll be honest about that. There are people in facilities who never made the transfer at all, because somebody there needed them, or because they made themselves needed, and that turned out to matter more than the address. So it isn't really the house I'm defending. It's the being required by something. This house happens to require a great deal, which is why it suits me. But if I'm honest, that's the thing on the other side of the scale, and the house is just where I currently keep it. And I want to be careful here, because I can hear how this sounds. I am not saying that everybody should stay in their house until they drop. I am not saying that facilities are warehouses or that the people who work in them don't care. I've been in a few, and I've met some of the finest people I've ever met doing that work, for money that would embarrass you. What I'm saying is narrower. It's that the decision gets made on a spreadsheet where only one column is filled in. Safety goes in the column. Everything else, the fire, the bench, the wall, the reason a man gets up at 5:15 has no column at all, because it can't be measured and it doesn't show up on any form. And so in the arithmetic, it counts as 0. It isn't 0. For me, it's very nearly everything. And I want to give you the language for this because I didn't have it that afternoon, and I've since worked out that it's the whole argument. There's a difference between the years in your life and the life in your years. And everybody's heard that said, and it usually comes off as a needlepoint pillow. But it isn't a slogan when you're the one sitting at the table. It's an actual trade with actual numbers on both sides, and it has to be made by somebody, and the only question is who. Here's my honest arithmetic. I probably shortened my life by staying here. I'll say that plainly, because pretending otherwise would make everything else I've said tonight worthless. Ice, stairs, a wood stove, a chainsaw I still start about 4 times a year, and 20 minutes to a hospital on a road that isn't always plowed. Some morning that arithmetic may come due, and when it does, nobody will be able to say they didn't see it. And in exchange for that risk, I get a life I recognize. I get the fire at 5:15 and the smell of the shop and the third drawer waiting on the bench and a wall I've been putting stones back into since 1974. That is a trade, a real one, with a real cost, and I've looked at both sides of it with my eyes open, and I would make it again this morning. What I'd ask of anybody's children, and I said this to mine, is not that you agree with the trade. You don't have to. What I'd ask is that you acknowledge that a trade is being made at all, rather than talking as though only one side has a number on it. Because when you say, Dad, it isn't safe, you're perfectly right, and you're also only reading one column. And when I say I'm staying, I'm reading the other one. Neither of us is lying. We're just both looking at half a page and getting angry that the other one can't see it. The day we laid both columns down on that table side by side, the temperature in this kitchen dropped about 20 degrees. Not because anybody won, because we could finally see what the argument had actually been about for 8 months. We're coming up on number 4 now, the one that ended the argument. The fourth thing I said was, here is exactly when I'll go. I've written it down, and when it happens, I won't argue. That's the answer. That's the whole thing. And I'd give it to anybody in my position, and I'd give it before you're asked rather than after. Because here's what I understood. Sometime in that February, before David ever drove up, before any of this was said out loud, there are only 3 ways this ends. 1, I refuse forever, and eventually something happens, and the decision gets made for me, in an emergency, by frightened people in a hallway. That's the worst version, and it is the most common one by a wide margin. 2, I give in now, at 82, while I'm still able to build a chest of drawers, and I spend whatever's left of me being comfortable and stored. Or 3, I decide now myself, while I'm the one deciding, not whether to go, but when. And I write it down. And I hand it to my children. I wrote mine on the yellow pad at this table on a night in February, alone, before anybody asked me for it. I want to say that plainly because I think it's the part that matters. Nobody made me. I sat down and was honest with myself about a thing I would much rather not have thought about, on an evening when I could have been reading. Here's what's on it. The first one is the fire. If I ever leave that wood stove in a state I shouldn't have, if I go to bed with the door open, if I put a load in and forget it, if there's a scorch on that floor that shouldn't be there, that's not a warning. That's the end of it. I go. Because a man who can't be trusted with fire in a wooden house he built himself is a danger to more than himself. And I'm not going to be the old fool who burns down a house with a neighbor's family a half-mile downwind. The second one is the driving. The day I have a near miss that's my fault, not somebody else's, mine, the keys go. And I told them, don't wait for me to notice. If Elaine down the road tells you she's seen something, or if the fellow at the diner mentions something, you come and tell me, and I will believe you over myself. That's a hard sentence to say out loud, and I said it anyway. The third one is the one that took me longest to write, and it's the one that actually frightens me. It's the day I can't be trusted with my own condition. Not forgetting a name. I've forgotten names my whole life. I mean the day I stop being able to give an honest account of how I'm doing. Because everything I've told you tonight depends entirely on my judgment being sound. And the particular cruelty of this business is that judgment is the very thing that goes, and it goes invisibly, and the man it's happening to is the last to know. So for that one, I can't be my own witness. I told David and Susan, you two are the instrument on that one. Not on the fire, not on the driving. I'll know those. On that one, if you both agree, independently that I've lost the thread, then I've lost it, and you bring me and I'll go. And I'm telling you now in a calm year with a clear head, so that you have this to hold up when I'm arguing with you in a bad one. That's the list. 3 things, written down. Now, I want to say why it's 3 and not 30, because the number matters, and I got it wrong on my first attempt. The first time I sat down with that pad, I wrote about 11 things. Every one of them was reasonable. And when I read the list back, I understood I'd written something useless, because 11 conditions is not a decision. It's a way of never having to make one. There's always going to be an argument about whether item 9 has really happened yet. A long list is just a refusal with better manners. 3 you can hold in your head. 3 your children can hold in theirs. 3 is a thing that can actually be checked against reality by frightened people in a difficult month, which is exactly when it's going to have to be used. And notice what isn't on it. Nothing about my knees. Nothing about how slow I am on the walk now, or how long it takes me to shovel it. Nothing about needing a hand with the heavy end of something, or a grab bar, or somebody else on the roof. Because those aren't conditions for leaving. Those are conditions for adapting. And there's an enormous amount of ground between here and a facility that people skip straight over. I've given up the roof. I've given up going up any ladder at all. I split less at a time than I did, and I stopped when I said I'd stop. Every one of those was a real concession, and none of them cost me the house. The list is only for the things where adapting doesn't work. Fire in a wooden house, a truck on a public road, and a mine that can't report on itself. Those 3 can't be managed with a handrail and a son who comes up monthly. That's why they're the 3. There's one more thing about the list that I'd want anybody to hear, and it's the hardest part of the whole business. You have to write it while you'd rather not. The only time a list like that is any good is when it's made by a man who is entirely himself. Clear head, no crisis, February evening, nothing pressing. If you wait, if you think, I'll deal with that when it comes up. Then the list gets written in a hospital corridor by a version of you who is frightened and in pain and possibly not thinking straight, or else it gets written by other people on your behalf. Those are the only 2 options, and both of them are worse. I did not want to sit down and do it. I'd like to be clear about that. It was a Tuesday evening in February and the fire was going, and I had a book about the ice sheet that I was enjoying, and instead I got the yellow pad out and spent an hour and a half writing down the terms of the end of my independence. It was one of the worst evenings I've spent in this house since Helen died, and it's the single most useful thing I've done in 7 years. And I'd say something to the children who might be listening to this, because I know some of you are. People send these talks to their fathers, I've been told, which I still find strange. Ask him for the list, not for the move. The list. You'll get a completely different conversation. Dad, will you go into a home is a question with one acceptable answer, and he's going to give you the other one, and then you're both dug in for another 8 months. But Dad, what would have to happen for you to consider it? That's a question a proud man can actually answer without surrendering anything. It puts him in charge of the decision, which is what he's actually defending. It isn't the house. It's the being the one who decides. Give him that, and most of the fight goes out of it. My son didn't know he could ask. He told me so, sitting right there. He'd been driving up here for the better part of a year with the wrong question in his mouth, and neither of us worked out that it was the wrong one until I put a piece of paper on the table. And I'd add one more thing for the children, which is this. If he gives you a list, you have to honor it, both directions. That means you stop raising it. Genuinely stop. No more brochures. No more meaningful looks at the stairs, for as long as none of the 3 has happened. That's your side of the bargain, and it isn't optional. Because the list is a contract, and a contract where one party goes on doing exactly what they did before is not a contract, it's a delay. If my children had taken that paper and then kept at me anyway, I'd have learned that honesty gets you nothing, and I'd have gone right back to head down and refusing, and we'd be worse off than before I ever wrote it. They've honored it. 4 months now. It hasn't come up once. And I'll tell you what that silence has been worth, because I didn't anticipate it. I stopped performing. That's the plain way to put it. For most of a year, every time one of them came up here, some part of me was building a case, making sure the walk was clear before they arrived, mentioning the shop work a little more than was natural, keeping the hip out of the conversation. I was a man on trial in his own kitchen, and I never once said so. That's gone now. There's nothing to prove because the terms are already agreed and written down, and neither of us has to relitigate them at every visit. My son came up 2 weeks ago, and we put a new sill under the shed and ate supper, and he went home. and there was not one moment of it spent on the subject. I got my son back. That's what the list actually bought. Not the house. I might have kept the house anyway by being stubborn. The list bought me the visits. And I want to tell you what it did at that table, because it wasn't what I expected either. The argument stopped immediately. Susan cried, which I hadn't planned on. And David sat there for a while and then said something I've thought about since, which was, "Pop, I didn't know I was allowed to ask for that." Because that's what they'd actually wanted the whole time. They didn't want me in a facility. They wanted to stop being afraid. They wanted to know that somebody was watching the situation, and as far as they could tell, nobody was. The old man had his head down and was refusing to discuss it. And so the only tool they had left was to move him somewhere safe. The conditions gave them the thing they were actually asking for, not the house, the knowing. And it gave me something too. And this is the part I'd press on anybody listening. I am not fighting anymore. That fight was taking something out of me that I didn't have to spare. Every visit had it underneath. Every phone call had it in the pauses. It's gone. My son comes up now and we work in the shop and talk about his daughter, and there is nothing sitting under the conversation. I bought myself years by giving up the fight. That's the arithmetic nobody tells you. The refusal costs more than the concession. The fifth thing I said was, here's what I need from you instead. Because you can't say no to somebody's love and hand them nothing. That's the mistake I very nearly made, and I'd have deserved what came of it. They came to that table with one tool. It was a bad tool for the job, but it was the only one they had. And if I'd taken it away and offered nothing in return, they'd have gone home with all the same fear and no way to act on it. And fear with nowhere to go turns into another conversation in 6 months, and a worse one. So I asked for 4 things specifically, not vaguely. A list. 1. David comes up 1 weekend a month, not to check on me, to work. There's always something here that wants 2 men and one of them younger. And there is a difference between a son inspecting his father and a son and his father putting a new sill under a shed. Same weekend. Entirely different thing. 2. The roof is his. I gave that up at 78 and I've held to it. And I don't want to hear about the roof again. He handles it or he hires it, and I don't want to know which. 3. Susan gets the truth on Thursdays, and I had to say the second half of that out loud, which was, I've been lying to you. 18 months of fine when I wasn't fine, that stops. If the hip's bad, you'll hear it's bad. And she said, that's all I ever wanted, Pop, and I believe her. 4. This house gets a proper looking over twice a year by somebody who isn't me, because I'll tell you the honest thing, I can't see this place anymore. I built it in 1971, and I've looked at every board in it 10,000 times, and my eye slides right off. A man who's lived somewhere 53 years cannot assess it. So somebody else walks it in the spring and the fall and tells me what they find, and I fix what I can and hire the rest. That's what I asked for. And every one of those, notice, is a thing that lets me stay here longer and safer, which is what they wanted, while I go on getting up at 5:15 and building the fire, which is what I wanted. We were never actually on opposite sides. We just both thought we were, because we were arguing about a house when the actual subject was fear. And I'd tell anybody making this list of their own, be specific and make it a real request, not a gesture. I could have said something vague, come by more often, call me. That would have been a nice thing to say, and it would have accomplished nothing, because it gives a worried person nothing to actually do. And a worried person with nothing to do goes back to worrying about the only concrete option they can think of. The 4 things I asked for are concrete. A weekend, a month, with work in it. The roof permanently off my plate and onto his. The truth on Thursdays, which cost me something to promise. And a proper inspection twice a year by eyes that aren't mine. Every one of those is a job. My children came to that table wanting to do something about their fear, and they left with 4 assignments. And I have watched what that did. David has a list on his phone now of things to look at when he comes, and he takes it seriously. And he is not frightened the way he was in that driveway in February. The move was never what they wanted. It was the only job they could think of. Give them a better job, and most of them will take it gratefully. And I'll say the last piece because it's the one I nearly left out of that conversation, and it would have been a mistake. I thanked them, not lightly and not as a way of closing the subject. I told them that a man of 82 whose children drive 2 hours to sit at his table and have a hard conversation is a man in an enviable position, and that I know it, and that there are men in this county with nobody at all coming up the driveway to argue with them about anything. That mattered more than any of the 4 things, because underneath their fear was a question they'd never have asked out loud, which was whether the old man understood that any of this was love. He did. He does. I should have said so 8 months earlier. Now I want to say the honest part, and then I'll let you go. I might be wrong. I want that said clearly, because there's a version of this conversation that's very popular and very comfortable, where the old man is wise and the children are meddling, and everybody watching gets to feel righteous about their own situation. That's not what I think, and it isn't what happened at my table. Sometimes the children are right. Sometimes the parent is being stubborn and calling it independence, and the fall that everyone could see coming arrives. And the last 2 years of a life are considerably worse than they needed to be because a proud man wouldn't have a conversation. I've watched that too. It's not rare. So how do you tell the difference? I've thought about it a great deal, and here's the best I've got. And it's a question rather than an answer. Ask yourself what you're actually defending. If you can describe it, if you can say plainly, this is what my day contains, and this is why it's worth the risk, then you're defending a life, and you're probably on solid ground. If you find you can't say what you'd be losing, if the answer comes out as just because, or this is my house, or I've been here 50 years and nobody's moving me, then it's worth sitting with the possibility that what you're defending isn't the life. It's the not being told. I could describe mine. I did describe it at that table, item by item, and it was the describing that made the case, not the refusing. And I'd add, if you find you can't describe it, that isn't necessarily a sign you should go. It might be a sign that the life has quietly emptied out while you were busy defending the building it happens in. Those are 2 different problems, and only one of them is solved by moving. A man alone in a house he never leaves, doing nothing, seeing nobody, refusing help and calling it independence. He isn't winning this argument. He's losing it slowly in private, and his children can see it from 2 hours away. The house is only worth defending if there's a life in it. So if the description comes out thin, the work isn't to argue harder. It's to go put something back in the day and then have the conversation in 6 months when you can answer the question honestly. And the second test is simpler. Have you written down when you'd go? If the answer is never under any circumstances, then you're not making a decision. You're avoiding one, and it will get made for you eventually in the worst possible way by people who love you and are out of options. I'm 82 years old. I'm in the house I built in 1971, and I intend to be here a while yet. There's a chest of drawers on the bench and a 3rd drawer to fit in the morning, and a beach that needs to come down before it comes down on its own. And there's a piece of yellow paper in the kitchen drawer with 3 lines on it in my handwriting, and both my children have seen it. That's my answer. So that's the answer. You're not wrong to ask. You're asking the wrong question. Here's what I'm actually afraid of. Here is exactly when I'll go in writing, and here is what I need from you instead. If you take one thing from tonight, take the 4th one. Write your 3 down. Do it on an ordinary evening when nothing is wrong, which is the only time it can be done properly. Now, if any of this has you thinking about the thing underneath it, about being out here alone, which is what your children are actually frightened of, I made another talk about exactly that, about the 5 people I speak to every single week and why it's 5. and how being alone and being isolated are two completely different conditions that nearly everybody runs together. That's the talk I'd send my own children, honestly. It's the answer to the question they're really asking. It's right there on the screen. Go on over whenever you're ready. The fire's still going here, and the kettle's still warm. I'll see you there.